Mary knew this was a special day, the day she finally had the opportunity to reveal her story to the whole world. Despite being sure everyone would deem her crazy, she took a seat in the studio and started her written monologue. I was born and raised in Girdwood, Alaska, a quiet town nobody ever talks about. A tiny piece of land so insignificant, most maps didn't even include it. With a population of only 3,000, it was barely considered a town. Every kid that grew up here used to curse their existence for being one of the unlucky bastards unfortunate enough to be born here. The small, isolated shithole where it's cold all year round, making it feel even more lifeless and generic than the North Pole. My family was like every other in this town, poor, unhappy, and too large for its own good. We could barely afford to pay the bills, yet my parents decided it was a good idea to have 2 children. Christmas was the one time our town felt normal compared to others. During that period, the low temperatures and snow were not unusual at all. It was every kid's favorite time of the year, even though some didn't even get presents. I will never forget the Christmas of 2006. All me and my friends could talk about was the new PS3 and how we were asking Santa for it. It became a competition to see who could impress Santa the most, in the hopes he'd bring at least one of us a PS3. I used to love the winter holiday period, and despite the fact my family was living in probably the weakest town economically, they always found a way to get me a cool present for Christmas Eve. But this year I was going to experience the worst Christmas of my life, the one that almost took my sanity. Well, I mean Santa almost took my sanity. Everyone is probably wondering, why did Santa Claus live in my basement? And how did I find out? I'll start from the beginning, which would be my birthday, December 12th. For my 13th birthday, my parents had saved up some money. It wasn't an enormous sum to throw a big party, but it was enough to order a few pizzas, some drinks, and a cake. I invited some of my friends over to my house and prepared my dusty SNES with its infamous Mortal Kombat 3. When I first played it, I was upset it didn't have the gore, but my older brother Kevin eventually fixed that. Kevin had short brunette hair, dark brown eyes, and was taller than most boys his age. He was very much into rock, listening to his Nirvana and Judas Priest discs, and sometimes even playing his guitar. His passion for rock was a way to cope with the boredom and lack of life in this forgotten town. I think his biggest defect was his rebellious attitude, but it could have also been his impulsive mentality. He would snap at anybody for the smallest thing. But despite all that, deep down, Kev was a big softy. I still think about him to this day. And I know it might sound weird, but when I listen to his old discs, it's like a part of him is still there with me. He didn't even get to sing me happy birthday one last time. I found him cold-blooded on the basement floor. The image of his lifeless body will forever be engraved in my memory and will haunt me in my nightmares until the day I join him. After what happened to Kevin that night, my only wish for my birthday was for my brother to come back. But even I knew that wasn't possible. For some time I didn't want to talk about my brother's death, but I had to give interviews to the police. Everyone wanted to know what happened to my poor brother. He was so young, so kind, yet so reckless. In a town so small, gossip spreads faster than cancer. The next day at school, everyone was talking about it. I was still in a state of shock. My child brain couldn't accept the fact that my brother was gone. But what affected me more was the constant questions about him, and the rumors the older kids came up with, saying Krampus got him because he was naughty, and other false stories like that. To this day, the cops couldn't tell who or what killed Kevin. At first, they wanted to think it was human, but the large, gory scratches on his body didn't resemble anything human. They were something only very large claws could match. My parents, along with the officers, looked everywhere, but they couldn't find a single clue. I remember my mother being so devastated. She wanted us to move, but my dad knew we couldn't afford it. The days flew by, and Christmas was right around the corner. I didn't want to go out with the other kids and play. I didn't want to play my old console. I basically didn't do anything all day but stay in my room. To cheer me up and make me get over what had happened, my dad tried to make a huge effort and get me a C3, but he couldn't afford it. On Christmas night, after my parents were asleep, I saw a present under the tree. I unwrapped it, and when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. My parents bought me a PS3. It was the first time I smiled since the incident. I was genuinely happy. I stayed up all night playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance on my shiny new, very expensive console. In that moment, it seemed like my life could take a turn for the better. After a couple of hours, the electricity went out. My parents were asleep, and waking them up was not an option. So I knew I had to go into the basement to turn the electricity back on. It was a common problem, and I knew how to fix it. But the idea of going back to that place gave me goosebumps. I went down the stairs, took a deep breath, and opened that damned door. What I saw next made me freeze in place. Sitting on the old rubbish mattress my parents used to sleep on was Santa Claus himself. My shocked self could only mutter in a weak whisper, "Santa?" "Yes, dear one." He turned his head toward me with a big smirk on his face. His clothes were soaked in blood, he smelled like a cadaver, and his eyes were glowing red. As he saw me, his smirk grew wider. Then he opened his mouth to speak, revealing his crooked teeth. "Hello, Mary. I hope you enjoyed your gift," he said in a raspy, cold tone. I didn't get what he was saying. "What gift?" "Your PlayStation 3, of course. I read your letter, and since we've been neighbors for so long, I couldn't help but honor your request," he chuckled softly. At this point, I was so scared I could barely process what he was saying. But then it hit me. The letter I sent him, I wrote exactly this: "Hi Santa, for this Christmas I want the coolest present in the whole world, a PlayStation 3, so I won't have to share the SNES with my annoying brother. I know a PS3 is expensive, but we can make a deal. I'll trade you Kevin for it." I had written it as a joke. I obviously would have never done that. But now it all made sense to my kid mind. Yet I still had so many questions. Santa spoke again. "Now that we've met, I have to go. Do not worry, you won't share the same fate as poor Kevin. But I want you to remember you asked for it. This is on you. Merry Christmas, Mary. I'm sure you'll enjoy your PlayStation." He got up, pulled aside an old bookshelf, and left through a hidden hole while loudly saying, "Ho, ho, ho!" I waited a whole 2 years before I told my parents about this, but obviously they didn't believe me like you probably want to.